Okay, so the recording has just begun. So welcome again, everybody. My name is Erica Eisen, and I'm the coordinator of the Writing and Academic Resource Center, or WARC. So today, we are going to discuss editing the senior thesis. So while this is sort of designed for students who are, seniors currently, editing their thesis in preparation for turning it in, it is, advice that is generally useful across all kinds of academic writing. So, if there are students here who are not seniors, then I think that this information will be perfectly useful to you as well. So let me get started on screen sharing. One moment, please. Okay. Do you guys all see my screen right now?
Yep.
Great. So let me go into presentation mode. All right. So sometimes the slides don't work. Has the slide changed for you? Did it work? Sorry, I keep deputizing you.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to divide editing into a couple of different categories, going from sort of the most basic to the final touches. I think when a lot of people think about editing, they just think about finding spelling mistakes or grammar errors. But of course, as you're rereading your thesis or any piece of writing, you shouldn't just be thinking about these small little tweaks. You should also be thinking about the logic of your writing. How does it flow together? Do the arguments make sense? This sort of thing. So with that in mind, the first type of editing I want to talk about is content editing. What do I mean by that? So by content editing, I mean making sure that your arguments are persuasive, right? They will convince your reader, your professor or whoever, and that the reader has all the information they need in order to understand, right? So things like defining specialized terms, making sure that all of the parts of your argument that are in your head and that make sense in your head are actually on the page, right? Sometimes when we're writing, because we know what we want to say, it can be a bit tricky to realize that, oh, actually, I didn't put that on the page, so another person might not be able to get that information. So it's important as you're editing to think about this matter. So one thing I want to do is to sort of give you questions to ask yourself as you're rereading your thesis that relate to each type of editing. So for content editing, a couple of questions you might ask yourself are, how do I define any specialized terms that my reader might not know, right? Specialized vocabulary related to your specific topic that even somebody in your field who's not well-versed in that specific topic might not be familiar with. Would adding a concrete example make the meaning clearer, right? So if you're talking about something that's very abstract, it might be helpful to give a specific example from the real world in order to make the meaning easier to understand. Is this information relevant to the point I'm trying to make, right? Sometimes, especially in the early stages of the writing process, we might write something and then much later in April realize that our focus has changed slightly or become more narrow or whatever, and that paragraph that we spent all that time writing, might not be so relevant anymore, might not be so important anymore. It's very tempting in these situations to keep that piece of writing because we spent so much time and effort on it, but in reality, it's a distraction, and we should, be willing, as difficult as it is, to remove information that is not relevant. What would someone who disagreed say about my argument, right? Are there counterpoints that I'm not considering that I should consider? And I'm going to go into more detail about that shortly. Okay, so I also want to give you guys some skills to take away in your writing. And the first, micro lesson basically is writing a counter argument. So, there is often more than one way to interpret a set of facts or, the data you have collected, right? You have one interpretation, but it's quite possible that there exists one, if not, many others. So if you consider the possible viewpoints, not just in your head, but in writing, and then explain why you believe they're incorrect, it will help you, strengthen your writing, because maybe your reader, your professor, has those exact same, criticisms or questions in their head as they're reading, and so showing that you have considered them, and then explaining why you're, rejecting them, or why you believe that they're not correct, will be very helpful. So I keep yawning because it's quite early where I am. So I've divided this into two, columns. So how you introduce their points, or the point of someone who might disagree with you, whether it's an actual counterpoint that has been voiced in the scholarship, or one that you're sort of theoretically presenting, and then how to show your counterpoint, your reason why you reject this idea. Okay, so in the their point column, we have sentence patterns like some scholars have asserted that, others might interpret this data or whatever as, one might argue that something, or it might seem that. So these are sentence patterns that you can use to introduce the argument you're going to be refuting. And then to introduce your own point, you might say something like, however, this fails to take into account something, or while understandable, this interpretation, lacks something, or whatever. This argument does not consider something, or this argument misses the fact that something, right? So this kind of counter argument, it can be useful in your discussion section, for example, when you're interpreting your data and explaining, why your interpretation is correct. It can also be useful in the literature review, right? So maybe you're writing about a topic that has already been written about, and there are, several viewpoints, several schools of thought related to this. Obviously you'll agree with one and disagree with the others. And in reviewing those other points, right, the interpretations or, theories that you disagree with, this might be a useful framing to use. Okay, so I also want to talk about some logic mistakes that I think are common in writing and how to avoid them. So I will give sort of a general definition and then an example to illustrate it. So the first mistake to avoid, it's called a false dichotomy or a false dilemma or an either or error. And that happens when you're considering only a couple of possible scenarios, despite the fact that more than a couple exist. Sorry, I don't know why I formatted like that. Right, so there are a number of interpretations or a number of possible situations, and you're only presenting two or three, right? That's a false dichotomy. So this sounds very abstract. Let me give an example. So here's an example. In past presentations, the sort of examples that I used were about Bishkek's pollution, sort of a imaginary thesis about pollution in Bishkek. So just to return to that theme, a false dichotomy would be something like either Bishkek's government bans all cars or we continue to suffer from terrible smog, right? Well, ban on cars is, one possible, solution to the problem, but those aren't the only two, right? It's not an either or problem. There are, many other measures that Bishkek's government could take to ameliorate, to make better the problem of pollution, right? So this is, falsely presenting the problem as, an either or problem, right? So as you're talking about, solutions to a problem or interpretations of data, make sure that you're not just presenting two or three when many reasonable ones exist, right? I'm not asking you to include ridiculous, absurd interpretations just because they're possible, but if there are many rational positions, then presenting just two is not not fair to your reader, let's say. So as you're reading, you might do a check, think, am I presenting all possible interpretations or solutions? And is this really an either or scenario, right? So I think these are really key words, right? In the example that I used, there's an either or, right? So think about, whether you're really getting a complete picture of what you're talking about. So another thing to avoid is generalizations. So making broad statements without evidence, right? So an example of this might be, all economists believe, something, right? Well, I think it's very rare to find a topic that everyone agrees on, even if they're in the same field, right? So probably a more realistic statement might be something like many economists believe, a number of economists believe, right? So the check for this might be, am I using words like all, most, a majority, or every? And if so, am I sure that those words are accurate, right? Sometimes it is accurate, right? If we're talking about, a majority of people voted for, this, right? That's measurable. But if you're talking about beliefs, feelings, I think it can be very difficult to say, all people do this, right? When I was in high school, one of my teachers gave me a piece of advice, which was to avoid using, superlatives, talking about the most, the best, the greatest, because it makes your reader think, is it really the most, the best, etc., or is there something else, right? It activates that question in their head. So when you're using words like this, be very careful because you might be making a generalization that is not accurate or fair. So a couple more. So another is called a straw man argument, right? A straw man argument, well, straw is like dried grass. It's a very weak material, right? So a straw man is when you present the argument of someone you disagree with in a way that is unfair and inaccurate. So of course, when we're in an argument, we want to win. When we are writing a piece of, persuasive writing an argument, we want to persuade our reader, and that might be tempting to, portray those who disagree with us in, a negative way, because then it's easier to win, right? But of course, that is not academic. That is not fair. And it doesn't actually help you win an argument. It doesn't actually help you persuade people when you present a caricature of your opponent's view. So let's look at an example. So we have a statement like, I don't think this new law will be effective in reducing pollution, right? So a straw man interpretation of this, an inaccurate, unfair presentation of this might be something like, this person doesn't care about the environment at all, right? Well, that's not what they're saying. What they're saying is something like, this person thinks we need to find another solution to the problem, right? Maybe they do care about the environment quite a lot, but they just don't think that this new law will work. So the first, summary of their points is really not fair, right? So this kind of thing is important to think about, for example, when you're writing a literature review, when you're going to be presenting, the ideas of a number of other people, you want to make sure that you're doing it in as accurate a way as possible and you're not unfairly characterizing the views of authors that you disagree with. So the check you can perform here is something like, am I taking quotes or ideas out of context? And would the other person, the other author, agree that I'm summarizing their point correctly, right? And the last thing that I want to talk about is making conclusions not supported by your data, right? I don't have a, there's no like fancy term for this that I could think of, but let me look at some examples and I think it will be clear, right? So here's an example. My study on the causes of pollution in Bishkek shows that all cities in the world suffer from smog due to too many cars, right? This is a conclusion that is not supported by the data because the study, right, this imaginary study is about pollution in Bishkek. It cannot possibly demonstrate something about all cities in the world, right? So in this case, the student is taking their data about Bishkek and saying that it for sure means something about every city in the world, right? So they are generalizing it across, geography when it's really irresponsible, right? Cities are very different from each other. This might be true of some cities, even many cities, but it cannot for sure, demonstrate something about all cities in the world, right? So avoid, making a generalization about, the world, geography. Here's another example. My research on climate activism in Bishkek today shows how ideas about the environment have changed over the past decades, right? So this is an issue because the students' research is about, things right now, maybe this is an anthropology or a sociology student who's interviewing people today. And they're claiming that this research shows something about, change over time, right? This is a mistake that I see pretty often. Students assume that they can demonstrate a change over time when actually, what they have is data about beliefs today, right? A survey about people's beliefs today, not historical data, right? So if you're, for example, discussing a change over time, be very sure that your data actually demonstrates that you actually have historical data and not just data that is talking about the present, right? The last writing tip that I want to make is to avoid flattery. So flattery is when you give a bunch of compliments to someone, oh, you look so beautiful, you did such a great job in your presentation, etc., etc., even when it's not really deserved. That's what flattery is. And sometimes I see students thinking, I want to make sure that my reader knows that this source that I'm citing is, really good. The way that I'm going to do that is to give this person a lot of compliments so that the reader knows this person is a great writer, they have written a beautiful thing. Then they will know that, it's important to listen to this data. Well, it might be appropriate to say that a certain book or scholar is important or highly influential in your field, if it's true, right? Don't lie. But it is not your job to shower them with compliments, to say, this is a wonderful book, this is a wonderful writer, etc. Right? So let's look at some examples. So, here's, an example of flattery that we should avoid. Something like, Chingiz Aitmatov is a wonderful writer. Maybe it's true, but it's not really your place as an academic to say this. Instead, you might say something that's, more neutral. Something like, Chingiz Aitmatov is a major figure in the history of Kyrgyz literature, right? Here, you're not commenting about the quality of his writing. You're commenting about his importance, his influence. Let's see another example. So Jamelia is an amazing book. This is flattery, right? Talking about how great it is. Something more appropriate might be something like, Jamelia is one of Aitmatov's most popular works, right? So one thing that we can see here is in the examples of flattery, the ones with the X, these examples are related to quality and to your opinion, right? Whether something is an amazing book, whether someone is a wonderful writer, that's ultimately a matter of opinion. It's not objectively demonstrable, right? You can't cite a source for that. That's not a book review, right? You can't cite an academic source. You can't give a data set for that, right? Whereas something like, someone is really important. This book is very popular. This book is very influential, right? Those are objective measures, right? For popular, you can look at, how many copies of the book sold, how many languages it's been translated into, etc. For an article, you can see how many times it's been cited, right? You can, see these things demonstrably. You can use numbers to back them up. They are concrete, objective measurements, right? So, I give the example of Chingiz Aitmatov, but, when you're talking about, people in your field, theorists or scholars in your literature review, this is something to keep in mind, not saying, so-and-so is a wonderful economist, but, saying that they are an important figure and that, a lot of the, scholarship related to your topic cites them is more appropriate. Okay. So the next type of editing I want to talk about is editing related to flow. So what do I mean by that? So flow is, making sure that the reader can follow your ideas easily and that the connections between each step in your arguments are clear, right? So this, occurs on multiple levels. We can talk about flow between sections of your thesis. We can talk about flow between paragraphs. And we can talk about flow between sentences. So it's, related to making sure that connections are clear. So again, let's look at our toolbox here. So ask yourself, is the logical connection between your paragraphs clear, right? Maybe a transition word or a sentence would be helpful. Something as simple as however or in addition, right, can be very helpful. And we had a list of transition words on our resources for students page, which the link of which we put in the chat in case you want to review those. Are there any paragraphs or sentences that are too long and need to be broken up, right? So maybe a sentence is so long that it's actually difficult to understand, or a paragraph is actually talking about a lot of different topics, and it might be useful to divide it in order to make it clear for the reader. Would adding section headings be helpful, right? I think a lot of students don't think of this, but especially if you have a very long section, it might be useful to add, headings within it in order to help divide up your content and make, the relationships clearer. Okay, so the key skill I want to talk about here is something that I've talked about in past presentations related to writing, but it is really important. So I'm just going to go over it again for those of you who haven't seen it before. So this skill is embedding quotes. What do I mean by that? Embedding quotes is the process of integrating part of a quote with your own words in order to smooth the transition between your own words and those of the author. So this is related to flow, the flow of sentences. Let's say, key points, proper citation must still be used. Let's look at an example. Here. So let's say my professor gave me some feedback on my essay, and they said something like, this essay was well written, although next time, please avoid the use of cliches. Okay, so this is the quoted material that I want to use. So if I were to embed some quotes from this, I would write something like, my professor told me that my essay was, quote, well written, but that I should avoid, quote, avoid the use of cliches, right? So here, I have my own words, right? And within my own sentence, I have just sprinkled the most important words from my professor's quote, right? I haven't just used the whole thing. This allows you to have a nicer rhythm to your sentences. It sounds more sophisticated, right? It can be a little bit unpleasant to read when there's one sentence from the writer, and then a huge block of text that's just a quote, and then another sentence from the writer, and then another big block of quotes. It can, the rhythm is not so pleasant. So this is a much more sophisticated way of integrating information, and it allows you to use only the most relevant information from a quote, right? The most important words, the most singular phrasing, and it avoids the introduction of irrelevant material. Okay, so the next type of editing I want to look at is editing for citation, which is of course very important. So here, you want to make sure that your claims are supported by evidence, your paraphrases are accurate, your sources are given proper credit, and your citations are formatted correctly. So ask yourself the following questions. Right, are my sources credible? First thing to ask, right? Am I using academic sources, or did I just Google this topic and find some random link, right? Your thesis is of course a piece of academic writing, and you need to be, using academic sources. Obviously, if you're writing about history, you're going to be looking at, primary sources that might not be academic. Of course, that's okay. But, if the main things that you're citing for your thesis are, articles that you found on the New York Times, well, that's not appropriate, right? Have I remembered to use quotes around words that are not mine? Of course, this is critical. I'm sure you all know this, but when you are using words that are not yours, you need to use quotes, of course. Have I cited all of my sources, right? Have I given credit to all of the authors? Are my quotes adding new material or just repeating what I've already said, right? So sometimes what I see students do is they give a sentence and then they use a quote that says exactly the same thing, right? Instead, I think this is a place where embedding a quote would be really useful, right? Because rather than having two sentences that say the same thing, you can integrate them into one sentence that sounds very sophisticated. Are any of my quotes too long, right? Sometimes it's very tempting when you need words to just use a really long quote and think that that's going to, solve your problem. But speaking as a reader, I think it's very obvious when a writer is trying to do that. And, introducing irrelevant material, as I said earlier, is going to make your writing weaker. And, lastly, are the citations formatted correctly, right? So if my discipline uses APA, are my citations in APA? Another thing to think about here is if you're using a citation manager, an online citation manager, sometimes it messes up the formatting a little bit. For example, if a title has quotes in it, those can get messed up, or if they have special characters, not letters in the title, those might get a little bit messed up in the formatting. So do take a look at what your citation managing software is giving you, just to double check that it is all correct. And then the last type of editing that I want to talk about is what is called line edits. So this is sort of the final touch, right? Putting the finishing touches on your essay, making sure that your grammar, spelling, punctuation, and word choice are all correct, right? You've gotten your content is great, the flow is great, etc. Your citations are all in order, and it's time to finally make these small tweaks. Okay, so ask yourself, have I gone over my text myself, or am I relying on my computer to do it for me, right? It's very tempting to just say, to run spell check or grammar check, and well, that's going to catch something. If speaking of a native English speaker, I can tell you for certain it is not going to catch everything, right? So I'm not saying don't use that tool, absolutely use that tool, but that should not be the only tool that you are using, right? You should be reading the text yourself. And moreover, so the next question I put is how to read my text out loud. I think it is very useful in editing to not only read your text, but to actually read it out loud. You don't have to say it loudly, even just whispering it to yourself. I think that's the best way to find, for example, oh, I'm using this word a lot. I should change it up to make my writing more engaging. Or, I'm missing a word here. I forgot to add a word, right? Reading out loud, even just whispering, is actually a really useful tool that professional writers use, and I would strongly suggest that you use it too for your thesis. Okay, am I using vocabulary that is appropriate for academic writing, right? Is it, too informal maybe? And I'll go over some examples of this in just a minute. And am I using this word just to sound fancy? I think especially, when you're not fluent in a language and that, you want to sound nice, you want to sound formal and academic, it might be useful to just, take a word, let's say good, and then put it in a thesaurus and find, the longest, most, formal sounding version of that and put it in our essay. Well, words don't just have, a meaning, they also have a connotation, right? They can have a feeling attached to them, positive, negative, etc. And, not all the words that the thesaurus gives you are going to be exactly the same in how they're actually used, right? So I would not rely on this tool because sometimes it can produce some humorous results. Okay, so some common mistakes in this area. Obviously, this is not going to be a complete list, but these are just some that stuck out to me as I was making this presentation. Some mistakes that I see a lot. Okay, so the first one is periods and commas go inside quotation marks in American English. So, Professor James Plumtree or something will probably have a heart attack because they used different rules in the UK. But I'm an American, and so I'm going to apply the rules that I know. Furthermore, it seems that most students use American English in their writing, so this seemed appropriate. So here's an example. Hello, comma, quotation mark, I said, welcome to today's lecture, period, quotation mark, right? So the commas and the periods go inside the quotes. Obviously, in your thesis, you're going to be using a lot of quoted material. So this is a very useful rule to know. Avoid redundancy. Redundancy means saying the same thing over and over again. So this can be sentences that say the same thing, even paragraphs. I hope not, but it could be. And it can be, words within one sentence. So let's see an example. So let's say the student wrote something like, pollution is a major serious problem with extreme severe consequences. Well, to me, it seems like that could just as easily be written as pollution is a major problem, right? For one thing, major and serious mean pretty much the same thing. So we can cross out one of those. And then with extreme severe consequences. Well, first of all, extreme and severe mean the same thing. So we shouldn't be using both of those. But, if something is a major problem, surely that implies that there are severe consequences, right? So the last part is not necessary. So of course, as you're writing, please make sure that you're introducing new information as you write. You're not just repeating yourself. Do not refer to authors you cite by their first names or use Mr., Mrs., etc. So let's see some examples here. So bad example, Chinggis wrote the white ship, right? This is not appropriate. He's not your friend, right? A good example would be Akhmatov wrote the white ship, or Chinggis Akhmatov wrote the white ship, right? Or another example, Miss Akhmatova was a poet, right? Again, she's not your neighbor, she's not your teacher. You don't call her, Miss Akhmatova. Instead, you would say Akhmatova was a poet, or Anna Akhmatova was a poet. And then the last one, going back to one of the points I made in the previous slide, is avoid language that is too informal. So these are the biggest mistakes that I see with this. The phrase a lot of scholars believe something, for example. A lot of is not really appropriate for writing. You can use it with your friends when you're talking, but in an essay, I would avoid it. So some alternatives would be, many scholars, numerous scholars, or a number of scholars. There are a lot of synonyms, or a lot of. These are, three that I would recommend that are appropriate for an academic piece of writing. Another common one I see is huge, right? A huge impact. I would not really consider this word very academic either. So, words that you can use instead might be major, a major impact, a significant impact, a considerable impact. All of these are more appropriate. And then the last one is really, right? Something is really important, it's, really something, right? Really, again, is another word that I would use in speaking. Probably I've said it multiple times during this presentation, but I wouldn't put it in an essay. So very, the simple word very is, very useful here, or extremely, right? Another option here is that we often have a more specific word to mean, very something, right? So for, very important, we have words like crucial, critical, essential, etc. For, let's say, very small, there's a, very small percentage of people believe that's something. We have words like, minuscule, these sorts of words. So oftentimes when you're going to say, very something, very good, you can say excellent instead. Very bad, you could say terrible, etc. Oftentimes there's, just one word that you could use that will, give your writing the desired level of formality as well. Okay, so in closing, I want to mention some further resources that you can look at. The first one is that examples of old student theses are available on the library's website. So you can go to this link, elibrary.auca.kg, and scroll down to senior theses. There's a section. And if you press that, you'll be able to see senior theses in different disciplines from past years. I remember, for example, when I was a senior, I had these very basic questions about formatting, but I was kind of embarrassed because I thought that they were stupid questions. So I didn't want to go to my professor to ask them. So I just looked at old student theses to see, I think it was like how to format the, table of contents or the acknowledgement section or something. And, that gave me the answer to my question without needing to bother my professor. So I thought that was very useful. The resources for students page, which we previously mentioned, and we put the link to in the chat, has a number of guides and examples for you to look at, including links to old theses and more specific advice on various parts of writing. So I would really encourage you to look at that. There's really a lot on there. Why is it going? And then lastly, but last but not least, you're more than welcome to come to the work at any stage, right? So you can book an appointment at work.auca.kg. Our writing tutors are more than happy to help you with really anything. I hope that in your senior year, you're comfortable and experienced coming to the work, but even if this is your first time, it's always a good time to find help, and we will certainly be able to help you. All right, so with that, I would like to stop screen sharing and thank you all, and open it up for questions. So if you could press the hand raise button so that we can keep it orderly, or you can put it in the chat, that would be great. Any questions? This is your chance.
Good evening, Miss Erika.
Hello.
I am Nazima. Yes, we are MAT students here in AUCA, and we are writing our research papers right now. And if we book a meeting with you for other workers at work, for example, on Monday, I have already booked, and I'd like to discuss about my findings parts of my research paper, and if I'd like to know about the procedure here in online meeting. I mean, how much time does it take to discuss with you or other personnel in work about our research papers? I mean, how much time does it take you to give feedbacks to us? Thank you.
Sure. So each lesson with the work tutor is 1 hour, right? So of course, in 1 hour, a tutor cannot possibly read your entire thesis, right? 70 pages or something like that. So I think it is useful to bring sort of a focused thing. So as you're saying, discussing your findings, that might be an appropriate thing. And especially, it might be useful to come with specific questions, or maybe there's a specific paragraph that you're not sure about, or a specific topic, so that the tutor can focus on that and you can use the time to the best of your ability. So our tutors are not there to check your grammar and spelling, right? But they can talk about ideas, research skills, brainstorm, all of this sort of thing. So if those are issues that you're having, they're very well trained to go over the topic. Maria, would you like to add something?
Yes. Well, one thing is, right, I would like you to keep your expectations realistic, first of all. That our tutors are, they are tutors that have been trained to be, they're students who have been trained to be writing tutors. They're not specialists in pedagogy. So therefore, what you can expect of them is a kind of another pair of eyes on your piece of writing. You can they will not be able to tell you, well, this is right and this is wrong, right? So because they guess, like I said, for pedagogy, for pedagogy advice, right? You need somebody with with research experience in the field, like Tamo. But what they can do is help you organize your thoughts. They will ask you questions about about your findings, and they will help you clarify your thoughts. That, I think, is a big value of the tutor. And they will also be able to take a look at your writing and see what seems to them a little off.
Yes.
They can say, well, this, I'm not sure I'm understanding this idea. Can you explain it to me one more time? And while you're explaining it to the tutor, you yourself will be able to clarify it to yourself. So one thing that you can expect is you can expect a lot of questions from the tutor, which you will then find will help you clarify your own thoughts and your own writing.
Yes. All right. Yeah.
Okay. Has that answered your question? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have other questions?
Thanks. For me, it was very clear and useful. No further question.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm glad that it was clear. And just to restate, we will be putting this recording on our YouTube page. So you can check our YouTube page, or you can follow our Facebook page, which will announce when it is ready and online. Thank you everyone for coming today. I hope that you're coming away from this talk with some useful tips for your writing, and I wish you guys the best of luck as you finish up your senior thesis. I hope it's not too painful.
Thank you so much. Hope you have a good weekend.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.